I'm Allison Harper, 28, a literary agent in Boston whose life changed with one phone call. When my grandmother Vivian died, she left me her entire estate, $4.5 million, including a historic Boston mansion. My mother Catherine's voice dripped with disappointment when she told me, but nothing prepared me for what I overheard that night. My Uncle Richard's hushed voice saying, "We need to make sure she never gets that inheritance." If only I'd known then how far my family would go to take what was mine. Before I dive into this nightmare, drop a comment saying where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had family members show their true colors when money was involved. Trust me, what happened at the Boston Literary Gala will shock you. The family weekend before the official will reading was my mother Catherine's idea. I should have known something was off when she insisted everyone gather at grandmother's estate, the estate that would soon be mine. As I pulled into the circular driveway of the historic Beacon Hill mansion, my stomach tightened. The house looked exactly as it had throughout my childhood, elegant, imposing, and filled with literary history. Grandmother Vivian had hosted everyone from Maya Angelou to John Updike in the grand parlor. My mother greeted me at the door with a kiss that didn't reach her eyes. Catherine Harper had always carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who felt entitled to more than she received. Her jealousy of her own mother's success as a philanthropist and literary patron was an open family secret. "Allison, darling, you've lost weight. Boston working you too hard?" She assessed me like a manuscript she was preparing to reject. "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy with the agency." The foyer filled with family members I hadn't seen in months. Uncle Richard, my mother's older brother, strode forward with his businessman's confidence. At 62, he maintained the physique of someone 20 years younger, though stress lines had deepened around his eyes. "There she is, the woman of the hour." His hug was too tight, his cologne too strong. "We have a lot to discuss about the estate, Allie. Lot of responsibilities coming your way." His wife, Aunt Patricia, hovered nearby in designer clothing that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her social climbing had always been transparent, her friendship circles carefully curated for maximum advantage. "Such a shame about Vivian," Patricia said, though I'd never once heard her call my grandmother by her first name when she was alive. "We're all just devastated." My grandfather Harrison sat in the corner, frail at 85, his eyes cloudy with cataracts, but occasionally sharpening with surprising clarity. He nodded at me from across the room. The only person close to my age was my cousin Megan, Richard and Patricia's daughter. At 32, she'd never held a steady job, floating between family-funded business ventures that inevitably collapsed. "Allison," she embraced me warmly, "I'm so glad you're here. This is all so intense, isn't it? I can't believe Grandma Vivian left everything to you." The way she emphasized everything made me pull back slightly. Dinner that night was excruciating. We sat in the formal dining room beneath the crystal chandelier that had witnessed decades of family tensions. "I just don't understand why Mother would leave everything to Allison," my mother said, cutting her salmon with surgical precision. "It's not that I'm not happy for you, darling, but there are other family members to consider." "Catherine," my grandfather Harrison warned, but she continued. "I mean, a literary agent? All those English literature degrees for what? To sell other people's writing?" She laughed lightly. "Vivian must have felt sorry for you." "Mom, I love my job," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. Uncle Richard leaned forward. "The practical concern, Allie, is that this estate is worth millions. The taxes alone will be crushing. The smart move would be to sell immediately, divide the proceeds appropriately, and everyone benefits." "Divide appropriately?" I repeated. "The will was specific, Richard." "Wills can be interpreted," Patricia interjected. "Your grandmother wasn't in her right mind toward the end." I put down my fork. She was perfectly lucid whenever I spoke with her. "Which wasn't often," my mother muttered. I excused myself after dinner, retreating to my grandmother's study, the room where she'd spent most of her time. The familiar scent of old books and her signature lavender perfume still lingered. As I ran my fingers along her desk, I noticed subtle signs that someone had been searching through her papers. The drawers were slightly ajar, folders misaligned. The important document folder, where she kept her personal papers, was missing entirely. A soft knock at the door made me turn. Megan stood there, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Peace offering?" She handed me one. "Mom and Uncle Richard can be intense. I know this is weird for you, too." For the next hour, Megan seemed like the only ally in the house as we reminisced about our grandmother. She asked about my life in Boston, my work at the literary agency, my plans for the estate. I found myself opening up, grateful for a friendly face. "Would you really sell this place?" she asked, gesturing to the walls lined with first editions. "It's so much a part of our family history." "No," I admitted. "I could never sell it. Grandmother wanted me to keep her literary legacy alive." Later that night, I went downstairs for water and froze when I heard voices in the parlor. "She's not planning to sell," Megan was saying quietly. "Says she wants to preserve the literary legacy or something." "Damn it," Richard hissed. "We need this sale. The bank won't wait much longer." "Keep befriending her," my mother's voice now. "Find out what else she knows." I backed away silently, my heart hammering in my chest. My cousin, the only person I'd thought I could trust, had been gathering intelligence for the family all along. I was completely alone. I couldn't sleep after overhearing Megan's betrayal. At dawn, I slipped back into grandmother's study, searching for anything that might explain why my family was so desperate for the inheritance. Behind the row of classic literature on the 3rd shelf, grandmother's hiding place since I was a child, I found her personal journal. Reading it felt like a violation, but I needed answers. The elegant, slanted handwriting filled page after page with observations about the family she'd watched unravel over decades. What I discovered sent chills down my spine. Richard's investment company wasn't the success he portrayed. He'd been borrowing heavily from loan sharks to cover gambling debts that had spiraled into millions. His desperation had driven him to embezzle from family accounts grandmother had trusted him to manage. My mother's entries were equally damning. Catherine had blown through 3 divorces and their subsequent settlements, funding a lifestyle of competitive social climbing and failed business ventures. She'd borrowed against her expected inheritance multiple times. The family was drowning in debt, and I was the unexpected obstacle to their financial salvation. I closed the journal when I heard shuffling in the hallway. My grandfather Harrison stood in the doorway, more alert than he'd appeared at dinner. "They'll try to take it all," he said, his voice clearer than it had been in years. "Vivian knew what they'd do. Don't trust them, Allison, not even Megan." "Grandfather, what do you—" "Harrison? What are you doing up?" Patricia appeared behind him, her solicitous tone contrasting with the irritation in her eyes. "You know the doctor said to rest." She glanced at me. "Was he bothering you, Allison? His mind wanders these days." "We were just talking," I said, tucking the journal behind me. After Patricia escorted my grandfather away, I locked the study door and continued searching. In the hidden compartment of grandmother's desk, I found photographs of financial documents, but before I could examine them, I heard someone trying the door handle. "Allison?" My mother's voice. "Why is this locked?" I quickly hid the evidence and opened the door. "Sorry, I was just having a moment alone." Catherine's face softened with practiced sympathy. "I know this is hard, sweetie. Can we talk?" She settled into grandmother's reading chair, arranging herself to look vulnerable, a tactic I'd seen her deploy countless times. "I'm worried about you handling all this," she began. "The pressure, the responsibility. Your grandmother wasn't thinking clearly when she made these arrangements." "She seemed perfectly clear to me," I countered. "That's because you didn't see her at the end," Catherine said. "The doctors were concerned about dementia. She would forget conversations, make strange accusations." She reached for my hand. "I'm saying this because I love you. We should contest the will together, for your own protection." The manipulation was so transparent, it almost took my breath away. Grandmother had been sharp until her final days, calling me weekly to discuss the latest literary releases and political news. Later that afternoon, I met with Lauren Blackwell, grandmother's attorney, at a cafe away from the house. In her 50s, with a no-nonsense bob and penetrating gaze, she confirmed what I already suspected. Your grandmother was of completely sound mind when she signed her final will. We conducted extensive cognitive testing specifically because she anticipated challenges. Lauren slid a folder across the table. Vivian knew exactly what she was doing, Allison. Why me? I asked the question that had been haunting me. Why not split it? She had her reasons, which she documented thoroughly. But be prepared. Your family has already been calling my office, suggesting everything from dementia to undue influence. When I returned to the estate, I found Richard in the parlor with a silver-haired man he introduced as one of Boston's top financial advisors. Allison, this is Charles Weber. He's helped many young inheritors manage sudden wealth. The intensity with which they both stared at me set off immediate alarms. A quick glance at the business card Charles provided showed he worked directly under Richard at the same investment firm, hardly an independent advisor. You'll need to sign over management rights temporarily, Charles explained smoothly, just until we can stabilize the tax situation and assess the portfolio. Absolutely not, I said firmly. I already have financial advisors arranged through grandmother's attorney. Richard's friendly facade cracked. You're being incredibly naive. This estate will crush you without proper management. My management, I countered, not yours. The atmosphere in the house grew frigid after that. At dinner, my family barely acknowledged me, speaking around me as if I weren't there. Only Megan made efforts to engage, which now felt sinister given what I knew. The next morning, I discovered something that moved their scheme from manipulative to dangerous. As I prepared to drive into Boston for another meeting with Lauren, I noticed a dark stain on the driveway beneath my car. On instinct, I checked underneath and found brake fluid leaking from a clean cut in the line. Someone had deliberately tampered with my car, a sabotage that could have been lethal on Boston's steep hills. I called a taxi instead, my hands shaking as I realized how far my family might go to ensure I never got that inheritance. The brake line was just the beginning of my family's campaign to discredit, demoralize, and potentially harm me. When I returned from my meeting with Lauren, I received a frantic call from Diane Taylor, my boss at the literary agency. Allison, what the hell is going on? I've received calls from 6 of your clients saying you personally informed them you're quitting the business to focus on your inheritance. Montgomery Press is threatening to pull their entire author list. My blood ran cold. Diane, I never called anyone. I'm not quitting. Well, someone's been making calls using your client list, which isn't public information. I spent the next 3 hours calling every client, reassuring them I remained committed to their work. Most believed me, but the damage to my professional reputation had begun. Back at the estate, I found my mother in the kitchen, preparing tea with an innocence that immediately raised my suspicions. How was your day, darling? You look stressed. She smiled sweetly. I kept my voice level. Someone contacted my clients pretending to be me. How bizarre, she said, not meeting my eyes. Maybe it's a competitor at your agency? The only people who knew I was even receiving an inheritance were family members. She shrugged and moved toward me with her teacup, stumbling slightly as she passed my open laptop on the counter. The entire contents of her cup spilled across my keyboard, seeping instantly into the electronics. "Oh my goodness!" she exclaimed with theatrical distress. "I'm so clumsy! Your work computer, too. What terrible luck!" The laptop contained all my client files, contract templates, and correspondence, none of which I had backed up recently. The accident had effectively crippled my ability to work remotely. That evening, Richard cornered me in the library. "I heard about Catherine's little accident with your computer. Such a shame." "It wasn't an accident," he chuckled. "Proving intent would be difficult." His tone shifted. "By the way, I ran into Martin Sloan at the club yesterday, head of the Boston Publishers Association. We had quite the chat about industry ethics. He was very interested to hear about a certain junior agent who might have leveraged a family connection to poach clients." My stomach dropped. Richard was now attacking my professional reputation within Boston's literary community, a devastatingly small world where rumors traveled fast. "That's completely false." "Is it?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "People believe what makes sense to them, And a young woman suddenly coming into millions while abandoning her clients makes for a convincing narrative. Later, I overheard Patricia on the phone in the garden, her voice carrying through the open window. Yes, we're very concerned about her mental state. Erratic behavior, paranoid accusations. The grandmother's death hit her hard, and now this inheritance pressure. We're considering intervention options. They were building a case that I was psychologically unfit to manage the inheritance. I retreated to the third-floor library, my grandmother's most private sanctuary. Behind a row of leather-bound classics, I discovered a hidden cache of letters tied with blue ribbon. They detailed decades of family manipulation, particularly Richard's financial schemes and my mother's jealous machinations against her own mother. I fear what Catherine and Richard might do when I'm gone, my grandmother had written to her oldest friend. Their sense of entitlement has grown monstrous over the years. A soft knock interrupted my reading. Megan stood in the doorway, her expression contrite. "Can we talk?" she asked. Against my better judgment, I let her in. Her apparent emotional vulnerability made her the most dangerous family member, the one who could get closest. "I know what they're doing," she whispered. "The calls to your clients, Mom's accident with your laptop. They're desperate, Allison." "And which side are you on?" I challenged. Her eyes welled with tears. "I want out of their manipulation too." "I'll help you." For a moment, I almost believed her. Then I noticed her phone partially exposed in her pocket, the voice memo app recording our conversation. She was still gathering intelligence. That night, I heard shouting from my grandfather's room. I rushed in to find Richard standing over him with an open pill bottle. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Harrison needs his medication," Richard said smoothly. "Doctor's orders." My grandfather's eyes were wide with fear. "Not those," he managed to say. I grabbed the pill bottle heart medication, but not the brand my grandfather took. A quick internet search later confirmed that mixing these particular medications with his prescribed ones could cause a dangerous drop in blood pressure. The next morning, I found my grandfather unresponsive in his bed. The ambulance rushed him to Massachusetts General Hospital, where doctors confirmed he'd suffered a hypotensive episode consistent with medication interaction. As he lay in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors surrounding him, Harrison beckoned me closer. "Safety deposit box," he whispered. "Boston Federal, key in my cigar box." His thin fingers clutched mine with surprising strength before he lost consciousness again. When I returned to the estate to find the key, Catherine informed me with cold satisfaction that the family had filed an emergency petition with the probate court, claiming I was mentally unfit to inherit and requesting a temporary freeze on all assets. "It's for your own good, Allison," she said. "You're just not stable right now." The probate court hearing was a masterclass in character assassination. I sat beside Lauren, watching my family methodically dismantle my life and mental stability with a collection of falsehoods so thorough it took my breath away. My mother approached the stand with practiced grief written across her features. "We've been concerned about Allison's stability for years," she testified, dabbing at non-existent tears. "The pressure of her career, her difficulty maintaining relationships. When my mother died, something in Allison simply broke." Richard presented the court with therapy records supposedly documenting my history of paranoid tendencies and emotional instability. I had never seen the therapist whose signature appeared on the documents. "Your Honor," Richard said solemnly, "we love my niece dearly, but she's simply not equipped to handle this level of responsibility right now. We're requesting only a temporary conservatorship until she receives proper treatment." Patricia submitted photos showing me in erratic states, cleverly edited images taken from various family events over the years, now stripped of context and presented as evidence of instability. Most shocking were the witnesses who testified to my supposedly threatening behavior. A man I'd never seen before identified himself as a groundskeeper at the estate, claiming I'd threatened him when he'd discovered me destroying property in the garden shed. "She said she'd make sure I never worked in Boston again if I told anyone what she was doing to those financial documents," he stated convincingly. Lauren objected repeatedly, but the damage was mounting. By the time the judge called a recess, he had already ordered a psychological evaluation and placed a temporary freeze on all inheritance assets. Outside the courtroom, Lauren pulled me aside. "They've been planning this for months, Allison. This isn't a spontaneous response to the will reading." My phone buzzed with a message from Diane at the literary agency. "In light of today's court proceedings, we need to place you on administrative leave. Clients are concerned." The family's strategy was comprehensive: isolate me professionally, question my mental stability, cut off my financial resources, and present themselves as concerned relatives acting in my best interest. That afternoon, I noticed an unfamiliar car following me from the courthouse. The same vehicle appeared outside my Boston apartment later that evening. When I confronted the driver, he quickly drove away, but I caught a glimpse of a private investigator's license on his dashboard. They were having me followed, documenting my every move as potential evidence. With my grandfather still unconscious in the hospital and my reputation under attack, I felt truly alone for the first time. I considered accepting the small settlement Richard had offered in exchange for not contesting their conservatorship petition. The constant battle was wearing me down exactly as they had planned. Then I remembered my grandfather's final conscious words: the safety deposit box. Using the key from his cigar box, I visited Boston Federal Bank the next morning. The contents of the safety deposit box changed everything. Inside was a USB drive containing a video of my grandmother Vivian, recorded 6 months before her death. Her face filled the screen, her familiar determined expression intact despite her illness. "If you're watching this, Allison, then Richard and Catherine have done exactly what I anticipated." Her voice was strong, unwavering. "I've spent my life watching them manipulate and scheme. They will not stop at destroying your credibility. They will attempt to destroy you completely." The drive contained irrefutable evidence, documentation of Richard's embezzlement from the family business dating back 15 years, including transfers to offshore accounts and falsified company records. There were letters from Catherine to Vivian's doctors attempting to have her declared incompetent years before any cognitive issues appeared. Most damning was a recorded conversation between Richard and Patricia discussing how to make sure Allison never sees a penny weeks before my grandmother's death. I also found a note with contact information for Jeremy Sullivan, an investigative journalist with the Boston Globe, who had apparently been working with my grandmother on an exposé about financial fraud in Boston's old money families. That evening, I met Jeremy at an out-of-the-way cafe in Cambridge. In his mid-30s, with perpetually rumpled clothes and alert eyes, he immediately struck me as trustworthy, a judgment I couldn't afford to make lightly anymore. "Vivian contacted me about 6 months before she died," he explained. "She suspected your family would contest the will and wanted contingencies in place." "Why didn't she just change her will?" I asked. "Cut them out entirely?" "She wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves," Jeremy said. "Vivian was playing the long game. She needed proof of how far they'd go." As we reviewed the evidence together, Richard's black sedan pulled up outside the cafe. He stormed in, his face flushed with anger. "Is this your new strategy? Feeding lies to reporters?" He turned to Jeremy. "Whatever she's told you is the paranoid delusion of an unstable woman." "I haven't told him anything yet," I said calmly, "but the evidence speaks for itself." Richard's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "Walk away from this inheritance, Allison. Take the settlement. If you don't, there won't be a literary agency in Boston that will touch you. Your grandmother's precious reputation won't survive what we'll reveal about her private life. Is that what you want? Complete professional and personal destruction?" After he left, Jeremy looked at me seriously. "He's terrified. That's good news for us, but it also makes him dangerous. How far are you willing to go with this?" I thought about surrendering, about accepting their settlement just to escape the nightmare. But my grandmother's words echoed in my mind. "They will attempt to destroy you completely." "All the way," I answered, "whatever it takes." After the confrontation with Richard, I knew I needed more allies. Jeremy was valuable for his investigative skills, but I needed connections within Boston's literary world to counter my family's attacks on my professional reputation. I remembered Professor Sophia Martinez, my grandmother's closest friend and a respected figure in literary circles, as the head of comparative literature at Harvard. If anyone would stand by my grandmother's wishes, it would be Sophia. Her Back Bay brownstone was exactly as I remembered from childhood visits, walls lined with bookshelves, the scent of Earl Grey tea, and old paper permeating the air. At 72, Sophia remained formidable, her silver hair cut in a sharp bob, her mind razor sharp. "I've been waiting for you to contact me," she said after embracing me. "Vivian told me you might need help." "My family is trying to have me declared mentally unfit," I explained. "They've frozen the inheritance, damaged my professional reputation, and they're building a case for conservatorship." Sophia listened intently, her expression darkening. "Your grandmother anticipated something like this. Richard has been desperate for money for years, gambling debts mostly. And Catherine," she paused. "Catherine has always resented Vivian's literary connections. Your mother wanted to be a writer once, did you know? Her manuscripts were rejected consistently. She blamed Vivian for not using her influence." What Sophia revealed next stunned me. Vivian was more than just a patron of the arts, Allison. Under the pseudonym V.H. Crawford, she was one of the most influential literary critics of the last 30 years. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. V.H. Crawford's essays had shaped contemporary American literature, influencing which authors received recognition and which books became part of the canon. I'd studied Crawford's work in college, never knowing the brilliant critic was my own grandmother. She kept her identity secret to avoid accusations of nepotism when she helped launch your career, Sophia explained. But she was incredibly proud of you, following in her literary footsteps. Why tell me this now? Because it gives us leverage. I'm not the only one who knows her secret identity. Sophia picked up her phone, and I think it's time you met her other confidant. 2 hours later, I found myself in the private study of Marcus Bennett, founder of Bennett and Ross Publishing, one of the largest independent publishing houses in the country. In his 60s, with distinguished silver temples and piercing blue eyes, he greeted Sophia with the familiarity of old friends. "So you're Vivian's granddaughter," he said, assessing me. "She spoke of you often." "Marcus was married to Sophia in the 70s, Sophia explained. "He remained close with Vivian long after our divorce." "Your grandmother was extraordinary," Marcus said. "Her critical essays shaped American publishing for decades. When she told me about her concerns regarding your family, I promised to help if needed." With Sophia and Marcus supporting my case, we began gathering counter-evidence against my family's claims. Lauren, my grandmother's attorney, revealed she'd been documenting the family's increasingly erratic behavior for months. "Vivian instructed me to keep detailed records of every interaction," Lauren explained, showing me a thick file. "Your family has broken several laws in their efforts to contest the will." My assistant from the literary agency, Zoe Chen, risked her position to provide evidence that someone had accessed my work email account from an IP address traced back to my mother's laptop. The accessed files included my entire client list and contract details. "Diane doesn't know I'm showing you this," Zoe confided. "But what they're doing to you isn't right." Jeremy's investigation into Richard's finances revealed connections to several gambling operations with ties to organized crime. "He owes over $2 million to people you don't want to owe money to," Jeremy explained. "That's why he's desperate for your grandmother's estate to be liquidated." As our counter-strategy took shape, my family escalated their efforts. I returned to my Boston apartment one evening to find the door lock broken, the space ransacked. My laptop was missing, along with the manuscript I'd been editing for one of my most promising debut authors. That same week, Catherine appeared at a literary fundraiser I'd helped organize, telling anyone who would listen that I was taking a break from publishing to deal with personal issues. Patricia attempted to bribe Dr. Eleanor Reynolds, the court-appointed psychological evaluator, offering her a prestigious position at a private clinic Richard sat on the board of. Fortunately, Dr. Reynolds recorded the conversation and reported the attempted bribery to the court. My grandfather Harrison finally regained consciousness, immediately requesting to record video testimony about Richard's medication tampering. "I've watched them manipulate this family for decades," he stated firmly to the court recorder. "What they're doing to Allison is criminal." The most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Megan appeared at my apartment late one night, visibly shaken. "I can't do this anymore," she admitted. "Dad's involved with dangerous people. He promised them money from the estate sale to cover his debts." I recorded our conversation as Megan unwittingly confirmed the family conspiracy, providing details about how they'd planned everything from the falsified therapy records to the witnesses at the hearing. "They're planning something big to stop you completely," she warned before leaving. "Dad said if the conservatorship fails, they'll move to Plan B, whatever that means." The final piece fell into place when Sophia discovered an invitation to the upcoming Boston Literary Gala, the most prestigious literary event in New England, attended by publishers, agents, critics, and authors from across the country. This year's theme honored hidden literary influences, celebrating anonymous and pseudonymous contributors to American literature. "This is it," Sophia said, her eyes gleaming. "This is what Vivian was waiting for. The perfect stage for her final move. And we're going to use it," Marcus added, "to expose your family and restore your grandmother's legacy and yours in one stroke." The Boston Literary Gala was 3 weeks away, barely enough time to implement our counter-strategy. With my allies, I developed a plan that would not only clear my name, but expose my family's deception on the most public stage possible. Jeremy published the first piece of our strategy in the Boston Globe, an exposé on financial fraud within Boston's elite families, carefully avoiding naming Richard specifically while describing his methods in recognizable detail. The article sent ripples through Boston's social circles, with several prominent families launching internal audits. "Richard called me 6 times yesterday," Jeremy told me with satisfaction. "Threatened everything from lawsuits to physical harm. He knows he's in the article even though we didn't name him." Sophia arranged for me to be a featured speaker at the gala, leveraging her position on the Literary Foundation Board. "You'll speak about your grandmother's influence on your career," she instructed. "We'll save the revelation of her secret identity for the event itself." My family's panic was immediate and visceral. Richard made 3 separate calls to the gala organizers attempting to have my invitation revoked. "He offered a $50,000 donation if they'd replace you with another speaker," Marcus informed me after speaking with the foundation director. "When that failed, he suggested you were mentally fragile and might cause a scene." The gala organizers, intrigued by Sophia's hints about a major literary revelation, refused to budge. Catherine's approach was more direct. She cornered me in the estate's garden, her composure slipping for the first time. "Whatever you're planning at this gala, stop it now," she demanded. "Take the settlement, Allison. $3 million is more than generous." "Is family peace suddenly important to you?" I asked. "After you falsified therapy records and tried to have me declared incompetent?" "We did what was necessary," she hissed. "You think you deserve this inheritance? You were always Vivian's pet project, her second chance at creating the literary prodigy she wanted. She used you to compensate for her own failed writing career." The bitterness in her voice confirmed what Sophia had told me about my mother's literary ambitions. "Grandmother believed in me," I said simply. "That's more than you ever did." Our preparations continued despite increasing interference. Lauren filed motions to lift the asset freeze based on Dr. Reynolds' testimony about the attempted bribery. Harrison's video statement raised questions about Richard's actions, prompting the court to appoint a special investigator. The night before the gala, I received an unexpected visitor. Megan stood at my apartment door, clearly distressed. "I took something from your room at the estate," she confessed, handing me a thumb drive. "Everything you had documenting their plans. Dad told me to destroy it, but..." She couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Allison. I've been helping them destroy your life." I accepted the drive, uncertain whether to believe her apparent remorse. Why the change of heart? I overheard Dad on the phone last night. He wasn't just talking about the inheritance anymore. He said something about making sure she doesn't make it to the gala. It scared me. After she left, I examined the thumb drive. It contained copies of evidence I'd already secured elsewhere. My family hadn't discovered my grandfather's safety deposit box or the files I'd stored with Jeremy and Sophia. Still, Megan's warning about Richard's escalating desperation was concerning. I called Jeremy immediately. They're getting desperate. We need to be careful tomorrow. Already on it, he assured me. I've arranged security for you and hired a private firm to document everything at the gala. Whatever they try, we'll be ready. Later that night, I returned to my hotel room after final preparations with Sophia to find it completely ransacked. The speech I'd prepared for the gala was gone, along with my laptop and the copies of evidence I'd kept in my briefcase. Even my gala dress had been slashed to ribbons. I sank onto the edge of the bed, momentarily overwhelmed. This was the culmination of their strategy: destroy my evidence and destabilize me before the most important night of my career. They wanted me to arrive at the gala, flustered, unprepared, and appearing exactly as unstable as they'd portrayed me. My phone rang Richard's number. I answered on speaker. "Unfortunate about your room," he said without preamble, his voice smug. "Hotels can be so unsafe these days. I understand your speech and evidence were taken. Such a shame. Perhaps it's a sign you should reconsider our settlement offer." "Is this what grandmother would have wanted?" I asked. "For you to threaten and terrorize your own niece?" What Vivian wanted stopped mattering the moment she decided to cut off her own family, he replied coldly. "Be smart, Allison. Take the settlement. Otherwise, I can't guarantee what might happen at tomorrow's event." After he hung up, I called Sophia. They took everything. All the physical evidence, my speech, even my dress. "Good thing we anticipated this," she replied calmly. "Marcus has everything backed up, and I have an appropriate gown you can borrow." As for the speech, Vivian's granddaughter doesn't need notes to speak about literature. "What if they try something at the gala itself?" I asked, Richard's thinly veiled threat echoing in my mind. "Let them try," Sophia said firmly. "The entire Boston literary world will be watching." I spent the night in Sophia's guest room, too anxious to sleep. By dawn, I knew exactly what I needed to say at the gala and exactly how to deliver the final blow my grandmother had been planning all along. The Boston Athenaeum transformed for the annual literary gala, its historic halls illuminated with soft golden light, tables adorned with arrangements of books and white roses. The city's literary elite arrived in evening wear, moving through the marble-columned main hall with cocktails and conversation. Editors chatted with agents, critics debated with authors, and publishing executives networked relentlessly. I arrived with Sophia, wearing a midnight blue gown from her collection that fit surprisingly well. My hair was swept up elegantly, my makeup carefully applied to mask my exhaustion. To anyone watching, I appeared composed and confident, the opposite of the unstable woman my family had portrayed. Jeremy positioned himself near the entrance, documenting arrivals. Lauren stationed herself at the rear of the hall, prepared to manage the legal aspects of what would unfold. Marcus greeted guests as a major donor, keeping a watchful eye on the proceedings. My family arrived precisely 30 minutes before the program began, clearly expecting to find me already destabilized by their actions the previous night. Catherine wore emerald green, her smile brittle as she worked the room, whispering to key industry figures. Richard moved purposefully between publishing executives, his hand occasionally touching the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket with nervous frequency. Patricia drifted behind him like a perfectly coiffed shadow, her smile never reaching her eyes. I watched Megan enter last, hesitating at the doorway, as if uncertain whether to proceed. Her gaze found mine across the room, her expression a mixture of guilt and warning. "Your mother is trying to have you removed from the speakers list," Sophia murmured, returning from a conversation with the foundation director. "She's suggesting you're under too much stress to perform. And," and the director told her it was too late to make changes. Catherine didn't take it well. Richard spotted me then, his momentary surprise quickly masked by determination. He made his way toward us, intercepting several influential critics and editors along the way, whispering briefly to each. Spreading last-minute rumors, Sophia observed. Desperate tactics. Allison, Richard greeted me with manufactured warmth, kissing my cheek. I'm surprised to see you here. After your hotel room incident, I assumed you'd be too upset to attend. It would take much more than petty theft to keep me from honoring my grandmother, I replied evenly. His smile tightened. I've been speaking with several of your colleagues. They're concerned about your recent instability. Arthur Pembroke from Horizon Publishing mentioned you made some rather alarming accusations in a recent email. Another fabrication. I'd never emailed Arthur Pembroke in my life. How interesting, considering I've never corresponded with Mr. Pembroke. Before he could respond, the Foundation director announced that the program would begin momentarily. Richard leaned closer, dropping all pretense. Last chance, Allison. Once you take that stage, there's no going back. I'm counting on it, I replied. As guests began taking their seats, a commotion at the entrance drew attention. My grandfather Harrison arrived in a wheelchair, accompanied by a private nurse. His presence was entirely unexpected. He'd been released from the hospital that morning, but had assured me he was too weak to attend. The shock on Richard's face was palpable. What is he doing here? He hissed to Patricia, who appeared equally alarmed. Harrison made his way directly to my table, positioned at the front of the hall. I wouldn't miss this for the world, he told me, his eyes clear and determined. Catherine approached quickly, her voice a strained whisper. Dad, you should be resting. This environment is too stimulating after your health crisis. The health crisis your husband caused by tampering with my medication? Harrison replied loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. I'm exactly where I need to be, Catherine. The Foundation director took the stage, welcoming guests and introducing the evening's theme, Hidden Influences, the Anonymous Architects of American Literature. She spoke about the power of unrecognized voices in shaping literary culture, the perfect prelude to what would follow. As the program progressed, through initial presentations, I noticed Megan becoming increasingly agitated, checking her phone and glancing nervously at her father. Richard himself seemed distracted, repeatedly scanning the room as if expecting someone to arrive. Finally, Sophia took the stage to introduce me. Her voice carried authority earned through decades in academia as she spoke about my work in the literary agency and my connection to the evening's theme. Literature has always been shaped by voices working in the shadows, she concluded. Tonight, Allison Harper will share insights into one such influential voice, a critic and patron whose impact on American letters has remained largely anonymous until now. As I approached the podium, the weight of the moment struck me fully. This wasn't just about exposing my family's deception or securing my inheritance. It was about honoring my grandmother's legacy, both public and private. Thank you, Professor Martinez, I began, my voice steady. When my grandmother Vivian Harper passed away earlier this year, most knew her as a philanthropist and patron of the arts. What most people didn't know, what I didn't know until recently, was that she was also one of the most influential literary critics of the past 30 years. A murmur ran through the audience. Under the pseudonym V.H. Crawford, my grandmother shaped contemporary American literature through her incisive criticism and championing of underrepresented voices. The reaction was immediate gasps and whispers as literary professionals processed the revelation. V.H. Crawford was a legend whose identity had been debated for decades. Tonight, I'm honored to announce the establishment of the Vivian Harper Literary Foundation, dedicated to supporting emerging writers and critics from diverse backgrounds. On the screen behind me appeared a series of photographs documenting my grandmother's secret career meetings with famous authors, early drafts of her famous essays, correspondence with publishers. Marcus had prepared this visual testimony, drawing from his decades of collaboration with my grandmother. My grandmother believed in literary integrity above all else, I continued. She believed in honesty, authenticity, and the power of words to reveal truth. I paused, meeting Richard's gaze across the room. His face had drained of color. In that spirit of truth, I must share something difficult with you tonight. The screen changed to display the evidence we had gathered: financial records of Richard's embezzlement, documentation of the false psychological reports created to discredit me, transcripts of recorded conversations revealing their conspiracy. Since my grandmother's death, my family has engaged in a systematic campaign to prevent me from receiving my inheritance. They have fabricated evidence of mental instability, tampered with my professional communications, and even resorted to physical sabotage. Catherine stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is exactly the kind of paranoid delusion we've been concerned about, she announced to the room. Allison needs help, not a public platform for these accusations. Are they delusions, Mother? I asked calmly. Or are they documented facts? The screen displayed my grandmother's video testimony, recorded months before her death. Vivian Harper's face filled the screen, her voice clear and authoritative. I, Vivian Harper, am of sound mind and body as I record this statement. I anticipate that following my death, my daughter Catherine and son Richard will attempt to contest my will and deprive my granddaughter Allison of her rightful inheritance. Their actions are motivated by financial desperation resulting from years of poor decisions and ethical lapses which I have documented extensively. Richard lunged toward the AV controls, causing a scene that confirmed everything my grandmother was describing. Turn it off. This is a private family matter. Two security personnel moved to intercept him as the video continued playing, detailing Richard's embezzlement from family accounts and Catherine's attempts to have my grandmother declared incompetent years earlier. Catherine's composure cracked completely. You are always playing favorites, she shouted at the screen, showing her mother's face. You gave her everything and left us nothing. What were we supposed to do? Her outburst silenced the room. In one emotional moment, she had inadvertently confirmed every accusation. Patricia attempted to salvage the situation, approaching the stage with a placating smile. Ladies and gentlemen, this is unfortunately a difficult time for our family. Grief affects us all differently, and, save it, Patricia, Harrison called from his wheelchair. The game is over. Megan stood in the middle of the stunned crowd, tears streaming down her face as she watched her family's public implosion. When her eyes met mine, I saw something I hadn't expected: relief. As security escorted Richard from the hall, still protesting loudly, I returned to my prepared remarks. The Vivian Harper Literary Foundation will begin accepting applications next month. My grandmother believed in second chances and redemption through honest work. Despite everything that has happened, so do I. The audience rose in a standing ovation, not just for the revelation of V.H. Crawford's identity, but for the dramatic justice they had witnessed unfold in real time. In one evening, I had reclaimed not only my inheritance, but my professional reputation and my grandmother's literary legacy. As I stepped down from the podium, Sophia embraced me tightly. Vivian would have been proud, she whispered. You delivered the perfect final chapter to her story. The aftermath of the literary gala unfolded with the pacing of a well-crafted novel. By morning, literary blogs and social media were buzzing with two interconnected stories: the revelation of V.H. Crawford's true identity and the public implosion of the Harper family. Jeremy's comprehensive article in the Boston Globe provided the details too complex for my gala speech, documenting the extent of my family's conspiracy with journalistic precision. Within 24 hours, the story had been picked up by national publications, transforming a private family matter into a public scandal. Richard faced the most immediate consequences. The morning after the gala, he arrived at his investment firm to find the locks changed and security waiting with a letter from the board of directors, placing him on indefinite leave pending investigation. Your business associates were in attendance last night, Marcus informed me over breakfast at Sophia's townhouse. The evidence of embezzlement left them no choice but to distance themselves immediately. By week's end, 3 of Richard's largest clients had filed lawsuits against him personally, and the SEC had opened a formal investigation into his financial activities. The gambling debts that had driven his desperation came due without the inheritance he'd counted on, forcing him to liquidate personal assets at devastating losses. My mother Catherine's social circle abandoned her with brutal efficiency. The women who had been her friends for decades suddenly had scheduling conflicts when she tried to maintain her regular luncheons and charity committee meetings. She showed up at the tennis club yesterday, Sophia reported with a hint of satisfaction. Clarissa Winthrop told her quite publicly that they were revising their membership criteria to exclude individuals involved in family scandals. Patricia attempted damage control through her usual channels of influence, calling in favors from society friends and offering exclusive interviews presenting her family as misunderstood. The strategy backfired spectacularly when recordings of her coaching false witnesses for my competency hearing were leaked to the press. One afternoon, my assistant Zoe called with surprising news. "Diane wants to see you immediately." She wouldn't say why, but she seemed unusually nervous. At the literary agency, I found Diane pacing her office, visibly uncomfortable. "Allison, I owe you an apology," she began without preamble. "I should have investigated the claims against you more thoroughly before placing you on leave." "You had limited information," I acknowledged, though the hurt remained. "Nevertheless, my judgment was poor." She slid a folder across her desk. "We've lost 3 major clients who followed you to the Gibson agency. I understand if you're planning to leave permanently, but I'm prepared to offer you partnership if you'll stay." The offer was generous partnership. At 30 was almost unheard of in literary agencies. But the ease with which she'd accepted false allegations against me had revealed a fundamental lack of trust. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I need time to consider my options." Outside the courthouse, where the temporary asset freeze on my inheritance was formally lifted, I encountered Megan waiting nervously by the steps. Her designer clothes had been replaced by jeans and a simple blouse, her usual perfect makeup absent. "I know you probably hate me," she began. "I would." "I don't hate you," I replied honestly, "but I don't trust you either." She nodded, accepting this. "I've been attending accountability therapy, trying to understand why I went along with everything for so long." Her eyes met mine briefly. "I'm sorry, Allison. Really sorry." "What will you do now?" I asked. Richard and Patricia had been forced to sell their Beacon Hill home to cover mounting legal fees, leaving Megan without her usual financial support. "Get an actual job, for starters," she said with a hint of her old humor. "Turns out having accomplished family betrayal on my resume isn't opening many doors." Despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy. "There's a position opening at the foundation. Administrative assistant. It doesn't pay much, but it's a start. You'd consider me? After everything? Redemption through honest work, remember? But Megan," I added seriously, "one wrong move and you're done. Permanently." The police became involved a week later when the forensic investigation confirmed that Richard had tampered with my grandfather's medication and ordered the sabotage of my car's brake lines. Criminal charges for attempted assault and elder abuse were filed, transforming a family inheritance dispute into a criminal case. The court officially cleared me of all allegations of mental instability, with the judge issuing a formal apology for the miscarriage of justice in the initial competency hearing. The psychological evaluator who had rejected Patricia's bribe submitted a comprehensive report declaring me exceptionally stable given the extraordinary circumstances. My grandfather Harrison moved into a luxury care facility close to the estate, his health improving steadily once away from Richard's interference. His wit returned in full force as he regaled his new friends with the story of the Gala showdown. Should have seen Richard's face when that video started playing. He chuckled during my weekly visit. Looked like he'd swallowed his bow tie. The literary community's response exceeded my expectations. What could have destroyed my reputation instead elevated it, with agents and editors impressed by my handling of the situation. Clients who had been poached returned, bringing new authors with them. Jeremy's investigation was published as a best-selling book titled Inheritance: A Literary Dynasty's Dark Secrets, cementing his reputation as a premier investigative journalist. We continued meeting regularly, our professional collaboration evolving into something more personal. Sophia and Marcus offered me partnership in a new literary venture, a boutique agency, focusing on underrepresented voices, operating in conjunction with the Vivian Harper Foundation. Your grandmother always wanted us to work together, Sophia explained. This seems like the perfect opportunity. 3 months after the gala, my mother requested a meeting at a small cafe far from her usual haunts. She arrived without her designer handbag or signature pearls, looking older and strangely vulnerable. "I won't insult you with apologies," she began after ordering plain coffee instead of her usual complicated espresso drink. "What I did was unforgivable." "Then why are we here?" I asked. "Because you're still my daughter," she twisted her napkin nervously. "And because I need to understand where it all went so wrong between us." "It went wrong when you decided your entitlement to grandmother's money outweighed my right to safety and dignity," I said evenly. "When you chose to destroy me rather than accept her decision." Catherine flinched but didn't argue. "I was jealous," she admitted, "of the relationship you had with her, of the literary connection you shared. My manuscripts were terrible," she tried to tell me gently, but I wouldn't listen. She looked up, her eyes clear for perhaps the first time in our relationship. I became exactly what I accused her of being: bitter, manipulative, destructive. "Are you in therapy?" I asked. She nodded. "Court-mandated initially, now voluntary." We sat in silence for several minutes, neither of us knowing how to bridge the chasm between us. Finally, I said, "I don't forgive you yet, Mom. I might never fully forgive you. But I'm willing to start with honesty and see where it leads." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning complicated and uncertain, like all meaningful human connections. Richard's criminal trial was scheduled for the following spring. The final blow to his fragile ego came when his former business associates testified against him in exchange for immunity, revealing a pattern of financial misconduct stretching back decades. On a crisp autumn day, I hosted the first literary event at the estate, a symposium honoring my grandmother's critical work and launching the foundation's inaugural grant recipients. Standing at the podium where Vivian had once introduced literary giants, I looked out at the gathered writers, editors, and critics. "Literature teaches us that every story has multiple interpretations," I began. "In the story of my inheritance, my family saw only loss and resentment. My grandmother saw an opportunity for preservation and growth. Today, we honor her vision by supporting new voices who will shape our literary future." Later that evening, as the last guests departed, Jeremy joined me in my grandmother's study, now my study with 2 glasses of her favorite bourbon. "To Vivian Harper," he toasted, "who orchestrated the perfect literary revenge from beyond the grave." I smiled, feeling my grandmother's presence in the room filled with her books and ideas. She always did know how to craft a satisfying ending. 6 months after the Boston Literary Gala that changed everything, I stood in the east garden of my grandmother's estate, now truly mine in both legal and spiritual terms, watching contractors install, reading benches beneath the old oak trees. The spring air carried the scent of freshly turned earth and new plantings, a fitting metaphor for the renewal taking place. The transformation of the property into the Vivian Harper Literary Retreat Center was well underway. The grand parlor where my grandmother had hosted literary salons now featured comfortable discussion areas and a state-of-the-art presentation system. The library had been expanded, with my grandmother's rare book collection serving as its centerpiece. The guest cottages at the edge of the property had been renovated to house visiting writers and scholars. "The landscapers want to know if you're keeping the rose garden or converting it to native plantings," Jeremy called from the terrace, consulting his clipboard. Our professional collaboration had evolved into a partnership that extended beyond the foundation, though we were taking that evolution slowly, both of us scarred by betrayal in different ways. "Keep the roses," I decided. Grandmother cultivated those varieties for decades, but we can add native gardens around the cottages. Inside the main house, preparations were underway for the afternoon's ceremony, announcing the first recipients of the Vivian Harper Foundation grants. 10 emerging writers and critics had been selected from hundreds of applicants, each receiving funding and mentorship to develop their work. In my grandmother's study, my study now, I reviewed my notes for the presentation. The room had been the site of both my family's betrayal and the beginning of my resistance. Now it felt like a sanctuary, the place where I felt closest to Vivian's spirit. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. My grandfather Harrison stood in the doorway, looking healthier than he had in years. Since moving into the guest house on the property, his cognitive clarity had returned fully, along with the dry wit that had made him my grandmother's perfect match for over 60 years. "Nervous about the big announcement?" he asked, settling into the leather chair by the fireplace. "A little," I admitted. "I want to get this right for her sake." Vivian never worried about perfect, he reminded me. She cared about authentic, about meaning. Harrison had become a treasured ally in preserving my grandmother's legacy, sharing stories and insights I'd never known. Their marriage had weathered Catherine and Richard's manipulations for decades, their private solidarity never breaking despite the family chaos. "Have you heard from your mother?" he asked carefully. Catherine had entered an intensive therapy program after our cafe meeting, finally confronting the jealousy and insecurity that had driven her destructive behavior. Our relationship remained fragile, limited to occasional phone calls and supervised visits, but it was more honest than it had ever been. "She sent a note wishing me luck with the ceremony," I said. "No backhanded compliments or passive-aggressive comments. Her therapist says that's progress." Harrison nodded, understanding the complexity of cautious reconciliation. "And Richard?" My uncle's situation offered no such ambiguity. Convicted on multiple charges including elder abuse, financial fraud, and criminal conspiracy, Richard was serving a 5-year sentence at a minimum security prison. His attempts to appeal had been rejected, his former colleagues testifying against him in exchange for immunity. His lawyer contacted the foundation, asking if we'd support early release in exchange for community service hours, I said. I declined. "Good," Harrison said firmly. "Some consequences need to be felt fully." Patricia had filed for divorce shortly after Richard's conviction, her survival instincts overriding whatever loyalty she might have felt. She'd relocated to Florida, attempting to rebuild her social standing among people who hadn't witnessed her public disgrace. Megan had surprised everyone by embracing accountability. Starting as an administrative assistant at the foundation, she worked diligently, never complaining about the entry-level position or seeking special treatment. Her insights into her parents' manipulation tactics had actually proved valuable in establishing protocols to protect the foundation from similar schemes. "Miss Harper?" Zoe appeared in the doorway. "The first grant recipients are arriving, and Professor Martinez is asking for you." In the main hall, Sophia was directing the catering staff with her characteristic precision. At 73, she showed no signs of slowing down, dividing her time between Harvard, the foundation, and our new literary agency venture. "There you are," she said when she spotted me. "Marcus just called. He's bringing a publisher who's interested in your grandmother's collected essays." The posthumous publication of my grandmother's critical work under her own name had become a personal mission. Vivian's secret identity as V.H. Crawford had allowed her to influence American literature without nepotism claims affecting my career, but now it was time for her to receive full recognition. As the ceremony began, I looked out at the gathered literary community agents, editors, critics, and writers who had come to honor my grandmother's legacy and welcome new voices to their ranks. In the front row sat Harrison and Sophia, the two people who had known Vivian best. Jeremy stood at the back, camera ready to document the foundation's first official event. "Welcome to the inaugural grant ceremony of the Vivian Harper Literary Foundation," I began. My grandmother believed that literature at its best does two things. It tells the truth, and it offers hope. Our 10 recipients exemplify both qualities in their work. As I announced each name, presenting checks and mentorship opportunities, I felt a sense of rightness that had been absent during the months of family betrayal and legal battles. This was what my grandmother had intended. Not just financial inheritance, but cultural legacy. After the ceremony, while guests enjoyed refreshments in the garden, I retreated briefly to my study to collect myself. On my desk lay a weathered manuscript box I hadn't noticed earlier. Inside, I found a complete, unpublished manuscript in my grandmother's handwriting, titled simply Truth. A note in Harrison's handwriting was paperclipped to the first page. She finished this the week before she died. She wanted you to decide its fate. Tears filled my eyes as I realized what this was my grandmother's only attempt at fiction, a novel she had worked on privately for years. The ultimate gift of trust from a woman whose literary judgment had shaped American culture. That evening, after the last guest departed, I gathered with my closest allies on the terrace. Harrison, Sophia, Marcus, Jeremy, Zoe, and even Megan raised glasses in a toast to the Foundation's successful launch. To Vivian, Harrison said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, who always knew exactly what she was doing. To found families, Sophia added, the ones we choose and who choose us. To second chances, Megan said quietly, her eyes meeting mine with genuine gratitude. As twilight settled over the estate that had been the centerpiece of so much conflict, I felt my grandmother's presence in the gentle breeze that stirred the pages of her manuscript on my desk inside. The inheritance she had left me was far more than property and money. It was purpose, legacy, and the courage to stand firm when everything seemed lost. To truth in fiction and fiction in truth, I said, completing the toast. And to stories that heal even when they hurt. Later that night, alone in my study with my grandmother's unpublished novel, I opened to the first page and began to read, feeling as though she were speaking directly to me across the divide between life and death. Her voice emerged from the pages, wise and wry, and uncompromising, the voice that had guided American literature from the shadows for decades. The story that unfolded was not about betrayal or inheritance or family dysfunction. It was about redemption, about finding strength in vulnerability, about creating meaning from loss. It was, I realized with growing certainty, the story she had always wanted to tell, but had chosen to wait until she could no longer be judged for its revelations. I would publish it, I decided. Not because it was perfect, it wasn't, but because it was true. And in that truth lay the most valuable inheritance of all, the courage to tell one's own story, regardless of who might wish to silence it. What about you? Has a family betrayal ever taught you something valuable about yourself? Have you ever discovered strength you didn't know you had because someone tried to break you? Drop a comment below. Sharing your experience, your story might help someone else facing similar challenges. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this resonated with you. Thank you for listening to my journey from victim to advocate. And remember, sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't revenge, it's creating something meaningful from the wreckage. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.